Research is almost always preparing for some sort of future thing that's not important now, which is why we need tax dollars to predict the future. It's like investing in defense. In the future, it'll be a problem. And then the COVID vaccine, the greatest story of like implementing something quick. But guess what? Some nerd came up with this idea of like, hey, cool, wouldn't it be cool if we just put this RNA?
Thank you so much for joining the show today. I've been really looking forward to kind of talking about how like intuition and science and research and kind of how we need to navigate or like kind of the life around it kind of comes together. And I feel like a lot of this show is about those two areas that kind of don't seem like they go together, which is like scientific sort of like experimentation and then like life, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm super excited to have you on the show. And yeah, I guess I'll jump right in with my first question.
Yeah.
Which is
so much for having me and coming to Canada.
Yes.
Awesome.
Toronto. It's one of my favorite places. Even in the summer or the winter, I typically like it here. So
yeah, so welcome.
All right, great. So first, can you tell us what a researcher does for those that may not know? And your work spans stem cell biology, aging, cancer, and Alzheimer's disease. What is the deeper question underneath all of this research for you?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question to start us off. So a researcher or a scientist does basically one thing. We test ideas. We test hypotheses. And we do that using different models. There's different types of scientists, different types of researchers. In biomedical research, where I am, there is a tendency to use cell lines as models, animal models like small animals like rodents and things like that. There's also worms we use. So there's all these models that we have set up in the lab, and then we go in with a biological question like, hey, just what is the function of this gene? And hypotheses generally are a little bit more specific, like, hey, we think this gene does that, does it? And then you test the null hypothesis, kind of prove yourself right or wrong, and then you iterate. That is the scientific method, and that is essentially what researchers and scientists do. And sometimes we're in the lab, and now the definition of scientists has grown, right, with all this like data. And I think anyone who looks even at data asking these questions that start with a hypothesis and then you're checking whether it's right or wrong, even those people are scientists. And we brought in the definitions, and yeah, that is what a researcher does. For me, I've been through lots of different fields in biomedical research. So firstly, in 2011 or so, I started working with stem cell biology. And this was when it was hot, right? Like science has these like phases.
It was like sci-fi. Like people were like, oh my God, we're going to be able to do this and that. And people were probably pouring money into it.
Yeah, exactly. And what had happened was in 2009, when the Obama administration took over, there were some strict rules around stem cell lines and how they were derived by the Bush administration that were kind of freed up by the Obama administration. There was so much excitement, and the excitement was around, can we take a stem cell and make literally any cell of the body? And I got caught in that. They're like, okay, young people, let's get you started. And that's where I started. Right? Yeah. But what was interesting, and I was kind of recruited to that effort at that time, was to look at whether there were some cancers, like pancreatic cancer, that were just not responding, right? So what's going on in pancreatic cancer that turning on the immune system against itself is not going to work? So that problem's still not solved. I mean, PDAC, or pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, has like a crazy, mortality. I think after 5-year survival rate is like something like 7% of people can survive after diagnosis.
Yeah.
And then,
so kind of thinking about like the deeper question underneath, is it really kind of, based off of what might be popular or funded Or like, what's the connection between all of those for you? Was it really truly just opportunity and some interest, or is there something else that's deeper for you that connects them all?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question. The answer is it's always a little bit of both, right? So that you follow the funding as a scientist, and you're forced to because you've got to eat, right? Like, you have to drink your cell culture media from your
But
lab.
how expensive is research? I feel like sometimes when we hear like, oh yeah, like funding, we need funding, we lost funding, we increased funding, like without kind of like saying like one individual scientist costs this much. But like if you were to say, well, typically projects span, 5 to 10 years, and they, can have upwards of funding of like, what's the ceiling and what's the sort of floor?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you could think about a standard R01, which is the biggest grant that you can get from the NIH, I suppose there's bigger grants somewhere, but this is the general biggest grant that folks apply to. That one has a max limit of $5 million, which includes a cut for your institution. It includes, everything.
Everybody gets the handout. Like, okay, all right, institution.
Yeah, and then, it includes, the mice. And so just to be nuanced about it, different research costs different money, obviously. But this biomedical research that requires empirical data, a mouse model, a worm model, a cell model, human tissue, all of those things cost more. And that's about, $5 million, including very low salaries for the scientists that actually work on it. That is it. But most grants are, less than that. And, people are happy to get a few $100,000 to do one experiment and move the needle forward, and to create a paper. But to answer your other question about how it all kind of connects, it's actually very much simpler, which is that I'm an immunologist, and the immune system is part of every single thing. So in stem cell biology, I was working in a lab that worked with type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune disease that takes down the cells of the pancreas, which was what we were trying to replace. And so those are the questions that were important. And sometimes there was this sense of, well, it's been overturned, but then maybe some aspects, but then you have all these other things that, type 2 diabetes is a whole disease. Maybe you fix one thing, and there's a sensationalization that we really do as scientists need to be careful of. And the public needs to be kind of careful of how we interpret some of this science that we read. And that's the other thing. Science is incremental, and one paper doesn't mean anything. The field has to agree, and then there needs to be funding to move it into the clinic where human beings can take advantage of what we have, kind of uncovered.
That was kind of leading me into this question that I had around like, like creativity versus like, scientific training, right? And kind of who gets to have that. So from what I kind of hear is like these folks who are credentialed and kind of at that top level can propose something that can be funded. And in that way, it's kind of like they're looking across all the different problems in the world and all of the different sort of progresses in technology and saying, you know what? I really want to study stem cell biology in this particular way. And in that way, there's a level of creativity. But when they build their teams out, or those folks that kind of are added to the project at a later sort of like, time, is there that same level of creativity? And if not, what is really what's the day in the life of like that person who's on the project, but not necessarily at the helm of like balancing science and maybe something like creativity or intuition?
Yeah, this is a pretty interesting question. Creativity has a lot of definitions. And I think science is a very creative process. And I think what differentiates a really good scientist from a mediocre scientist is your choice of the question that you chose to answer in the first place.
Right.
How you answer it, of course, matters, and the tools that you have, et cetera. And so creativity is important. Kind of, more at that later stage. But the folks that are learning, and that's the other thing, right? Science is analytical. It is it doesn't have the reputation of being very creative at all. But, eventually, once you've learned the language, you've learned what's important. It's almost like if you talk to a dancer, once you learn all the moves, right, then you can bring your intuition and then you have art.
Yes.
Right? So science, I see, is similar to that, that first you get the basics down. You're not trying to make the wheel. You're not trying to, be so creative that, you don't know how to do your plie. You got
to abandon technique, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's about that technique in the beginning, being unbiased and being careful with your experiments, the way you design them, not conflating ideas, learning the discipline that goes around that. That's important. That's not a creative process. But dance is still creative, right? So it's creative later on when you have that sort of freedom. And, some people, we talk about the pipeline and barriers to access. I would say that's true, that more higher level thinking is reserved for folks who, in the world of dance, if you think about it as a meritocracy, the harder you work, the better chance you have of getting to that position. But, in my experience, and, I've trained with some of these people that write these grants and come up with these bigger questions. It's also kind of very much in the ecosystem, right? So that professor learned under that professor who learned under that professor, and the models are sort of passed down, and now you do it at another university. So there is a little bit of limitations where you do need a model that can answer a question first. Then your creativity comes in. But using this model, what can I answer?
Yes.
Right.
But how do you introduce new models? Because earlier, I thought it was fascinating when you said that even with some of the types of biological, I don't want to say samples, but animals that you might choose is kind of within this initial structure of, what model are we going to use to start to test or find out more about our, initial hypothesis or about our initial sort of experiment. So you're talking about mice versus worms versus all of these different things you might choose. I imagine that, some of those genomes differ, even if they are kind of laddering up to a human question, right? But kind of back to models, I would think that there needs to be room for new models to also arrive whenever you are kind of well, none of the models that we have work, or there's a model that we have that might work, but there's trade-offs. When do you then get creative about new models, and who gets to say so?
Yeah. That's interesting. I can only give you examples, because all of this is empirical.
Right.
I can give you an example of the Alzheimer's disease, right? We thought there was one gene that was, as a community, we thought there was the one gene that was important for this, which was the amyloid beta gene. Now that we know that tau is also a problem with the Alzheimer's, it's of the pathology, not to get too technical. And so all these mouse models, so mouse models are genetic models, right?
Sure.
So you can decide this versus that, especially when you study the gut-brain axis now. You've got a model that starts in the brain, and you're asking the question of, does the gut impact the brain? Well, it might, but in my model, I will never know, right? And so the models are pieced together, and people publish studies based on, hey, my model has this strength, and your model has that strength. These are the conclusions, and let's put it all together as a story. But, in terms of getting creative to come up with new models, honestly, we, historically have worked as a community. Now, as a community, we understand that this mouse model has this limitation. Therefore, it's time for a new gene. And then new technology like AI will always come up with a new model. New models and new technologies go hand in hand. You could even think about the mouse model as a new technology. We were not able to, kind of cut and snip genes and overexpress them however the heck we want in the past, right? Now we can do it efficiently. There's leaky systems. All of those are being solved with new technology that's almost, in my experience, almost always an interdisciplinary effort. Now you're getting computational scientists into bio, and you kind of are looking at new models that way. And there's folks who are actually just so, a very exciting idea for AI is that they're actually trying to translate the mouse genome, which is where a lot of the work is done, into the human genome, making the connections using computational power. It's very, very exciting,
Would you say like that's one of the best sort of stories for AI right now? Like the earliest sort of forms of AI and what you guys are kind of dealing with in the industry is, can we get stronger models? Can we have more mapping one-to-one? Can we get a stronger sort of foundation before we then go off and say it's going to solve the problem for us, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that's one of the strongest stories for AI or?
For the mouse human? No, I mean, I think that the strongest story that I'm hearing is the most popular story is that for drug discovery. And that is also kind of model, but they're saying, okay, let's just work with human data. We have all this big data. We have genomics data of the DNA, transcriptomics data of the RNA, proteomics data of the protein. Now they're looking at the connectome, which is how each nerve, neurotransmitter connects to another part of the brain, neuron to neuron connectomics. Very, very exciting. And you can get mouse data for the connectomics, of course, but you have a lot of human data that they're now going in to analyze. And I think that's where it is. It's in drug discovery, the biggest story, where it's like, well, we know this pathway is involved in this disease, but which point in the pathway should we target in order to get the fewest adverse reactions, for example, right? So that's a good application, strongest application for AI, but there are many others. Diagnostics is one that's very, very exciting because it's the most easy to implement, right? So we've got, scans of the retina, for example. This is something that's, kind of a popular example of how AI is being used in diagnostics in the clinic. We'll take an image of your retina and tell you how, whether you're pre-diabetic or not. And so you could have the interventions that you need, and that the AI is training on images in a way that a human really could not catch. Sections of like colon biopsies, they're getting in there and looking at images and asking, we have the training data set. We know this is the trajectory of like how the patient goes from a healthy colon to colon cancer. Is there anything in here, AI, that we could have caught earlier? And then, data is trained, hopefully ethically trained, on including all the diversity of people out there. That will always be a limitation. But that's a really cool application for AI to start getting disease detected early, because another thing I know is that a lot of the drug targets, they're really good early on in the disease, and then later on, with late stage cancer. So at early stages, if we can catch it, that's a really strong application for AI.
Yeah.
And the last one is the most, I think, like AI for teaching.
Yeah, sure.
You're learning a new language of science and biology, and especially for me, I never really learned to code. And AI's teaching me. I don't know what you think about that.
No, absolutely. I think there's applications for AI that are like a stronger story for teaching than others. So as my partner's a radiologist, right? And so one of the things I'm constantly talking to her about is, like, babe, are we at the point where like radiology or where AI can take your job? And she's like, no, and a long way from it. And it's really interesting too, when I think about like, for instance, like disease diagnosis, or even like things that we might be using like image-based sort of like evidence to, help AI or train AI. Well, there's also, it's not just the image of like, hey, here's an image, tell me what it is. Obviously, like, there's training that goes into it that was conducted by humans, right? To kind of give it that framing of like, okay, this is healthy versus this is not. That I think is really interesting from like a can AI, there was something you said that I'm curious about, because can AI, when it comes to disease detection, actually just detect something that humans can't? Or that the probability of humans catching is lower? Because I would almost think like, well, it's trained on the fact that someone caught it before, right? Like, in kind of where it's like it knows the framing of, oh, this is what disease looks like. Is it potential that like something that was never, kind of like categorized before, AI can now do, even though it may not have had a direct training on it.
Yeah, that
To the best of your knowledge.
Yeah, that is actually the hope, right?
Yeah.
Especially with imaging data. We have human brains, right? We're picking up only as much as a human brain can pick up. And now I can tell you what a healthy human colon is, and I can tell you what a disease colon is, and then I can populate your AI every step along the way.
Sure.
And like, was there something there that you can see that I can't see?
I can't.
That is the hope. And also, you can start benchmarking using their own data. That's the idea of personalized medicine, and AI can get involved with that in a way that I can't imagine right now.
Yeah.
So yes, and here's the other
Possibly. Yeah. Yes, possibly the hope is. Yeah.
Yeah, the hope is, but also false positives. We don't every technology, every diagnostic technology suffers from false
Even
positives.
humans.
So, yeah. AI is great to equip the radiologist with, right? Like, did I miss something?
Mm-hmm.
Or does it thinks this? Do I agree? And just like any other AI tool right now, it's just to help us do our jobs.
Yeah. I want to kind of switch kind of back into talking about pipelines and where we're currently at, right? So right now we're in Toronto, Canada. You've worked here in Canada. You've worked in America and the Bay Area and elsewhere. And I'm kind of curious about, like, in the face of funding cuts and shrinking academic pathways, even if we are kind of widening the definition around scientists, how are scientists like you navigating uncertainty without kind of losing meaning or momentum? I would almost feel like part of, if I were a scientist like you, I would feel like part of my job is momentum, is learning upon learning upon learning. What happens when we pause like this or we have these disruptions?
Yeah. For scientists, certainly in the US and in Canada, which is inexplicably linked with the US.
Sure.
And the whole world is in terms of science, it does feel like an attack on what our work. It feels like an attack. And if you told me that the NIH was, the government was cutting funding for research, for now, because we're focusing on education, for now, because we're focusing on healthcare, I would be like, okay, cool, we'll slow down, fine, right? But the way that the NIH is cutting funding is so, there's friends of mine who were on diversity supplements wanting to get into grad school that are not going to now, or they're delayed, and their life is happening.
Yes.
Guys married, children are going to happen.
Yes.
That's, let's, work for the bottom line for some other company and never get to any higher level of education. People are in science really passionate about learning, right? And so it does feel like an attack. And those 200 words, I don't know if you've heard about these 200 words that have been banned by the NIH. Like, if you write a grant that has the word woman in it or diversity, now at a time where we have big momentum, especially for women's health, we just got all this. Okay, fine. Now the birth rate is declining, so now we can work on fertility, not women's health, but fertility.
Sorry, real quick rant. One of the problems that I see a lot with people who are not as educated or literate around the healthcare, pharmaceutical, sort of medicine community and like research is that they think that you're the problem. You, my doctor, are the problem. You, the researcher, are the problem. You, whoever has the face of it, is the problem. When it's really these systems and these structures that have just been protecting themselves and infiltrating themselves over time, kind of like insurance, that can, make it very hard to change and bring about some of the things that I think we would all be able to benefit from. So to kind of come back to the question, because I was just like, what the fuck? Like, it's just like, can we, I like being creative when it comes to finding a way around opposition. Mm-hmm. And in this situation, I deem the reliance on government and sort of national award systems as the opposition only because they've chosen to become that through the systems that they kind of perpetuate with, like, yes, we need credentialed individuals. We need a process. I'm not hating on process, love process, but there also needs to be a level of, hey, who are we really doing this for? And if we are doing this for the greater good, can the greater good chip in a more meaningful way than passively through their tax dollars?
Yeah. I love your excitement, and I love that there is a sense of getting alternative funding. But there's one thing that's very important here that I can only exemplify using the COVID vaccine.
Okay.
Right. The mRNA vaccine and the story of Moderna is fantastic.
Okay.
They originally came to our lab in 2012 saying, we have an RNA, want to do something with this? And we were like, yeah, let's try it, but get out of here. We don't know what this is.
What
is RNA? And like, what kind of special RNA? Like, what's the... So they kept iterating, and they took an industry approach, like funding for getting this technology out to people. That was their vision. But that research, right, is not important in 2012. That IP that was got from a university, why, right? And then the point I'm trying to make is that research is almost always preparing for some sort of future thing that's not important now, which is why we need tax dollars to, kind of predict the future. It's like investing in defense, right? Right. In the future, it'll be a problem. So, and then the COVID vaccine, the greatest story of like implementing something quick. But guess what? Some nerd came up with this idea of like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we just put this RNA to vaccine, and then there needed to be taxpayer dollars that said, okay, it's not important now, but we can give you a little money for this because each person's not losing as much, right? And then you invested in that, and the United States was a leader in that field because they invested in that. So, not to say there's a lot of science. The whole process is not super efficient, right? There's a lot of science that's ready to go. Let's implement this now, right? And then there's science that's going to be important later. And we do need to continue to invest in that in order to get the trust of taxpayer dollars. You need all this credentialization. That's just how it is. And, stem cell biology, it's also like an unrealized potential, right? Like we're dealing with type 1 diabetes. We can be happy with just glucose monitors, right? But why do we want to replace the pancreas? Because it's a better technology. It's better for us. It can lead to growth. And that's why we invested in it. It's not going to make money today, right?
And so, kind of thinking about like, how has, being a minority or even having to embrace certain like stereotypes shaped your experience as a woman of color in STEM, both kind of external facing, like maybe through your career, even having to explain yourself or navigate that, but also internally?
Yeah. So this model minority myth is definitely here to debilitate us. First of all, okay, to talk about like South Asians in STEM, there is this sense that we're great executors, hardworking, pushing through, white knuckling through a lot of different things. And as the Asian Americans have talked about, there's a bit of a bamboo ceiling. I don't know what we would call it with South Asia. I don't know, banana leaf ceiling. I don't know what kind of ceiling. It's not strong enough, actually. We have to come up with a different word. But there is like a bit of a ceiling, and we're seen as the doers, but not as the visionaries.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Keep going.
Yeah, no charismatic leader. No, you just do this job, you do it well, and guess what? It's going to replace you because you're just a set of hands anyway. Or in STEM, like it gets more and more complicated, but it's still just white knuckling through a lot of different like very technical things. And the South Asian community is great at that, and then we hit a ceiling. And some of that is internally, kind of, there's this comedian, Zarna Gar.
Yeah.
You know her.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. She's a comedian.
I also love her just like rise. Like she was just like doing the stand-ups in the small areas, and now she's got these big,
Yeah, she is getting a lot of flack in the South Asian community.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because she takes on the Tiger Mom persona, and she says like, this is it. This is our secret sauce of our people. She uses this term that like got me, which was monetize your misery. She says, and it's funny because everybody's in on it, and it's funny as our Tiger Moms told us for discipline, all of these things. But the lived experience is that we've kind of raised our children not to optimize for joy, but to monetize our misery. Like, are we really saying?
Yeah. And then the implication there is kind of like misery is a constant. Yeah. So monetize it. Not misery is an option, or misery can be challenged, right?
Yeah, And then unfortunately it shows up internally where it's like, then you get to the higher levels of the Maslow's hierarchy and you're like, oh, hey, I have all these degrees. I've got everything figured out. I got my finances in order. Here I am at the top. Then there's that ceiling where it's like, well, you're not a leader. You're not a visionary. You're not going to be here, changing the conversation, or you're just in the lab. You're on your computer. You're getting things done, and you're nothing beyond that. And so, I don't know how much of that is caused by external forces, how much of that is internal. It's a combination of the two. But Gen Z's doing better. I think Gen Z's making movies and doing different things. And of course, it also matters whether you're an actual immigrant or you're first or second generation. My personal experience has been kind of interesting. For me, in the pipeline, as you call it, every kind of talent pool has a pipeline, right?
Sure.
Mickey Mouse Club to Britney Spears.
Yes.
However they get to the NBA, there's a pipeline for talent. And I think that for us in science, each of these bottlenecks in the pipeline, like, getting into grad school, getting into a postdoc that has great resources, then doing good science, and then being given the opportunity to take care of that taxpayer dollar to do the science. There is something that's happening in the pipeline that's kind of trickling us out. We're not we are overrepresented at some stage as South Asian people in general, but at some level there is an underrepresentation, and that's been sort of kind of my experience too. And now I'm held back by NIH funding, but that's going to impact. We were building the pipeline with diversity in it, right? And now we're going to stop it, right?
Yeah.
So that's I don't know if there's any positive. I don't have anything positive to say about that other than, we have to kind of stay in touch with our, our calling.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, the details of how that affects you, but it's like, it reminds me of, you said something about leaks and how it was kind of already like, like there's something happening where people are kind of leaking out. And I think that's kind of happening around a lot of different science industries, where if people are figuring out that like, yeah, I have the capability, the aptitude to make it to the top. I can continue with that PhD. I have it. My Tiger Mom showed up for me and she put that in me, and I know that I can do that. But now I'm like, do I want to? Or, is it worth it? Or, is this blocker something that I want to white knuckle through? And I have I think maybe an over optimistic sort of positive outlook on that, which is, this is not at all like anything necessarily to the government, but be careful with smart people. Be careful.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when people would say that, that proverb around like, idle hands are the devil's plaything, right? Well, smart minds are also in that category, which is if you don't give them that process to white knuckle through for 25 years only to never make it, and they now have that upbringing and that skill set, and now they're starting to look elsewhere and realize that there are other opportunities, because I almost would make a bet on they are not going to dissatisfy their cultural expectations, because whatever's ingrained, same thing with, Black kids. I mean, I am very much like, we have legacy trained into us. Look at the Rosa Parks of the world and the Martin Luther King. It's like, you are somebody and go do it because it's been done. Even if it was just a slave revolt, like go do something. And if you don't want me to go to the public school down the way, or if you're going to make it hard for me to go to the private school down the way, well, I'm still smart. But now you've just pointed my ability in a direction that maybe you never really wanted. So be careful with smart people. And I like that level of creative chaos, because I also, like I said, I'm betting on that foundation that they have culturally, whatever it might be. And then that skill set that they've developed to go into a direction that we couldn't have thought of before. And hopefully still bring about a positive aspect.
Yeah. I thought I was doing a podcast. I'm getting free therapy.
Hang on, girl. Hang on. Go point that in a different direction and surprise them.
Yeah.
Okay. So I kind of want to ask you, like, if someone sort of listening feels called to scientific research, but doesn't feel that they fully belong in these institutions yet, or maybe they've felt those pipelines and that sort of leaking that you were kind of talking about, what wisdom would you want them to carry forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here, thinking back to 20-year-old Priya, I was, the lack of role models can be infuriating, right? It's like, what are we doing here? Are you giving me the runaround? Am I just here to be like a helper girl? Like, what is this?
What is this?
And so I did not trust the people that were in their 20s and in grad school, for example. They're teaching you how to do science. There's also something you have to learn in your 20s for your pruning, right? Mind over matter, but stay positive, and all of these things. There's a pace at which science is done. Like your questions need to be answerable by the model. You're learning to kind of titrate your talent, right? And someone has to show you. You need to find a role model. You need to find a mentor, right? And in order for us to create something different and beat the barriers ourselves, perhaps, we kind of have to take the support wherever we're going to get it. And the mistake that perhaps I made as an angry 20-something-year-old, maybe not angry, angsty 20-something, was I didn't trust it. I didn't take the help. And so the wisdom is always holding two things that's true at the same time.
Yes.
Or multiple things that's true.
Yes.
So it's true that the system is not made for you. It's true that you can't trust the system, but you also have to trust the process. But grab the mentors that you have and keep on moving.
Beautifully said. Very, 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 very quantum in that ending there with that superposition reference, just in case y'all were go watch the other episodes about quantum mechanics and breaks it down. But yes, I think true wisdom is holding multiple truths at once and also figuring out how and when to activate them, especially along your own journey. Right. So, thank you so much. That was so great. Now you're giving it back. I want to give it back. Okay, cool. So thanks so much for allowing us to just kind of come together and talk about this, moment in your life. I can't wait to see where we end up in a few years or, 5-10 years where, scientific research is, and you look back on this episode and you're just like, I'm glad I captured that because things are completely different now in a better way.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm so happy to be here and talk with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Priya. Okay.